And
But
so
according
that
to you,
doesn't.
there's no real problem at all because the issue is
No,
really settled.
there is a problem, and there will remain a problem.
But
That
you
the
compare it to
construction.
the Nagas, which is very different. You know, the Nagas, no big treaty was made with the Nagas. Basically, everything you're saying is trying to underplay the importance of the Kashmir region. That's what you're doing. And it's a very
It is.
dangerous operation, this, because I'll tell you why. It's not just Kashmir. How Kashmir is treated reflects on the Muslim minority inside India itself and what the feelings of that is.
That connection is not quite what you might think. For the principle that secularism should be the same everywhere, while it is not very welcome among many people in the Kashmir Valley, those in the Indian Muslim community, which I think is a large majority of that community, understand that Indian secularism is an important thing, and the inclusion of Kashmir in India is part of that secularism, which is why Indian Muslims outside Kashmir have never substantially supported
Well,
the
many
separation.
of them, look, let's be frank, I mean, you know, they are scared. Lots of them feel they live in a permanent state of siege, especially during the BJP government. They were under heavy attack ideologically. Textbooks were being rewritten and changed. Then you had the massacre in Gujarat. So naturally, being a minority, they are careful. They don't want pogroms and they don't want to be killed. But that doesn't mean they have no sympathy for these people.
Sanjay, let's go to another issue, that is Afghanistan. How do you see the situation in Afghanistan complicating India-Pakistan relations?
Well, the situation, as I read it in Afghanistan, is that there was a Taliban movement created by Pakistan, and it was initially defeated. America decided to pursue other ventures, and it paid much less attention than it easily could have, and therefore did not do much to build an effective Afghan state. That may have been difficult, but one can imagine an application of money that would have.
You're talking about since 2001.
Yeah, since 2001.
Okay.
So now the situation, about a year ago, America decided to start spending more money doing that, and we'll see how it goes. But right now, America doesn't have and cannot easily get enough soldiers from any country into Afghanistan that will really handle the problem. And frankly, even sending Predators, these drones into Pakistan or doing anything else in Pakistan will not strategically affect the situation. It's the only path that I can see to prevent Taliban rule in Afghanistan, which I think is well worth preventing for the vast majority of the Afghan people, is for America and NATO to hold on, to take some casualties as they're taking, hopefully to inflict fewer civilian casualties than they are, but I'm not optimistic about that, and build up the Afghan army as quickly as they can. It has to be an army of a few 100,000, enough to seriously interfere with Taliban operating in eastern Afghanistan and entering from Pakistan. Once they get to there, then it'll still be a mess, but the U.S. can withdraw, and at least the civilian casualties that are coming from heavy U.S. firepower, at least those particular casualties will not be happening.
And you think that occupation itself will create some more resistance or no?
It has created some resistance, and it will create some resistance. But Afghans also know, they know where the Taliban come from. And so they don't see it simply as an American occupation, that they know that the Americans came in to throw out a Pakistani colonial enterprise which they were suffering under. And that if the Americans just up and leave, cruel as they are in their use of firepower, even if they up and leave, they'll be back under the same occupation.
But let me ask you one question before I bring Tariq in. The question is, now people are talking about neo-Taliban, which means the word Taliban has become something, the word kulak under Stalin, which meant one thing at one time, and then everybody who opposed Stalin became a kulak. Similarly, now Taliban is a code word for anybody opposing American presence. How do we account for this new, more complex entity? Because we cannot reject all of them under the same argument, because they are, reactionary, therefore they must be fought and defeated. There are people who are fighting it for nationalistic reasons and simply refusing to be subject to that kind of violence. How do we account for that and the fact that insurgency is increasing? And do you think that increase in insurgency is also embroiled in a proxy war between India and Pakistan?
I doubt that there's a substantial Indian component. It would be not easy for India to motivate Wahhabi-inspired Muslims to do anything
How about Northern Alliance?
Maybe Northern Alliance, but Northern Alliance, I mean, I think India and Northern Alliance have a great similarity of views. But Northern Alliance is not heavily involved right now. It would become either the organizations of the alliance or the ethnic groups which form the Northern Alliance could become the basis of a future Afghan army. And no doubt those are the groups from which the U.S. is now recruiting. But that is not what's happening right now. What's happening right now is a struggle among Pashtuns and mainly between the U.S. and Pashtuns. The Afghan army does play a role in some of these operations. But I think India's role is quite secondary. India is a small fraction of the U.S. In terms of its impact on Afghanistan.
Do you see Indian connection, any difficulty for
I don't think
realization?
the Indian role in Afghanistan is significant, actually. I think really what has happened in Afghanistan is that the failure of the government imposed by the United States following the defeat of the Taliban has failed to deliver. It's corrupt. There's endemic corruption. Karzai's brother is well known as the largest heroin smuggler in the country. And all this accumulation of wealth by a tiny elite has now turned a large chunk of Pashtuns in Afghanistan against the occupation. If you read US intelligence reports coming in, and some of them are being published, others are being circulated, they're very desperate because they've seen the change and the shift taking place. I mean, about 4 weeks ago, the Financial Times sent a senior correspondent in there, and he just returned with a map which they published of the areas which are sympathetic to the insurgency. And he wrote that lots and lots of government officials officially working for the Afghan government privately will tell you that they want to get rid of this government and they support the insurgency. So it's as if the ship, it's like the Titanic. It's hit the iceberg. The US intelligence, the people working there know it's hit the iceberg, but news has yet to spread. So what is the way out? I think the US has to have, NATO has to have an exit strategy now, and an exit strategy soon. But what should replace it? For me, that's an important question. I do not think that a repeat of what happened after the defeat of the Russians and the civil war with the imposition of a ultra-Wahhabi fanatical regime on Afghanistan helped the people of Afghanistan or anyone else, to tell you the truth. That is gone. The neo-Taliban, as the British intelligence units called them, are much, much wider than what was before. But even so, my feeling is, and I return to this, that it has to be a regional solution. So you have to have the withdrawal of America and NATO, but you have to have Pakistan, India as the big power, Russia and Iran coming together and saying, okay, we are prepared to support a government, a coalition government of all the forces in the country, of which the Pashtuns are the largest, for 10 years. Let's have a 10-year experiment. We will back them, no violence, we will come down on that quite heavily, give peace to a region where there's been war for 30 years, and let's reconstruct the country. You know, it's a long shot, but it's a better chance than anything that has happened so far. I think the Americans have lost it, basically, in sending 100,000 more troops, killing more people, expanding the war into Afghanistan is going to have a totally counterproductive impact. Yes. It has to be a regional solution involving these powers. And if the Pakistanis are talking to the Indians on all issues, they should discuss this, saying, we need your help, come in and help us. And the Russians and the Iranians. Whether the US likes it or not is neither here nor there. That is what the region needs. And increasingly, regional needs should be settled by regional players. That's my opinion, whether it's South America, whether it's South Asia, whether it's the Middle East. You can't do it unilaterally on a bilateral basis between the United States and one country.
Tariq, I agree with everything you've said. However, I'd like to add, in Afghanistan, the democratic process has been used to disenfranchise the Pashtun majority.
I agree.
Whereas in Iraq, it was the Shia majority was brought into office and power. There it has been the reverse. Yeah. Unless that imbalance is restored one way or the other, it's not going to work. So there has to be a domestic component, a regional component with guarantees from international forces, and China is not going to, Russia is not going to allow permanent U.S. bases in
No.
that area.